Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. A big spoiler warning for this book club episode. Everything will be spoiled. The ending included. So today we are talking about Rita Indiana's Tentacle, which was first published in 2015. The edition I read was published in 2018, which was translated into English by Achi Obeya. It is an experimental dystopian science fiction climate disaster time travel book that deals with themes of gender, queerness, race, class, art, class again, environmentalism, and yes, time travel.
Yeah. I will say when I was trying to find the book on Audible, which is not available there yet, I got some interesting results.
Yeah. Well, so the original Spanish name, I'm not going to try to say because I'll butcher it, and I apologize in advance for what I'm going to do my best to pronounce, but a very different name, but they went with Tentacle because I believe it was actually translated into German first and then English. And the author was like, I just love Tentacle. It's got like an icky, like it's like got this like connotation.
I mean, they're not wrong. I definitely was like, okay. And then because I put the S on it at the beginning, thinking that it was tentacles.
You're right.
Yeah, I kind of forget that there's a whole world of, because my partner would laugh, because I think that I don't even know what I was looking for. And he was like, you're going to find tentacle porn. I was like, what is this? What is this? So,
yep.
But it's not like that necessarily. Like, not to that level.
No.
And if that's your thing, no judgment. I was just very surprised by it.
Yes. Well, it reminds me of my mishap when I was on that show that was hosted by two like teenage girls.
Yeah.
And they ask you for the book recommendation. And I recommended the Lilith series by Octavia Butler.
Oh, no.
And it has tentacle stuff in it. I just sort of forgot. I feel really
you
bad
have to go
about
back.
that.
Don't read that. Don't
I have
read
to
that.
Email them like, oh no, I'm so sorry. Wait until you're older and then read it.
10 years. Give yourself 10 years and then go for it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so what I'll say about this is like, it's a short book, but it hits you fast.
Yes.
It's like fast and a lot.
It's a lot. I had to go back and forth a few times because I was like, wait, what? Because it takes you a minute to realize how the book is plotting itself, like going. So you have to go like, oh, okay. Because when you will go into a new thing, not realizing, is it going to be flashbacks? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? It's going to be that. I was like, oh, okay. Yes.
Because the time travel works in a really interesting way in this, where it's sort of like strange daydreams you're having that you don't necessarily have a choice in having, but you can kind of like see them.
Yes. And experience them.
Yes.
I will say creativity because that was new.
That was
a new way to travel.
It was very interesting. I had to look up. I'm like, to be sure, this is the same character, right? Okay,
right,
good.
We do. That's what I had to do. I had to go back. Wait, did I not read this name before? This is a not unusual name. So let me go back here.
Right. Wait, there are pirates? Okay, hold on.
Right. Buccaneers. Why are we talking about Buccaneers?
Yes, but it's all related. It's all related. That being said, content warning, offensive language. Some of this I'm like, because it is a translated version. It's also from like just different culture. So I'm not entirely sure, but offensive language. Sexual assault, death, abuse, homophobia, drug use, climate change, natural disasters, death of dog.
I was very upset.
I knew you would be.
I had to like skip through a little bit. Very upset.
Yeah. I knew you would be.
Billy.
Poor Billy. Oof. Yeah, that whole scene was not good. Quick about the author. Indiana is a Dominican music composer, member of the band Rita Indiana y los Misterios, and a producer and author. Tentacle was the first Spanish language book to win the grand prize of the Association of Caribbean Writers in 2017. About the translator, Obejas is a Cuban-American author, translator, and journalist. She's also written a couple things that I recognize. So very cool. All right, so I'm going to go through the plot here. Okay. This book is kind of tricky to describe if you haven't discerned that yet. It opens in the Dominican Republic in the year 2037, when the world's oceans have pretty much been completely destroyed, in large part due to the actions of President Said Bona, who accepted these biological weapons that spilled into the oceans and wrecked the environment. So we largely follow sex worker Asilde Figueroa, who dresses as a young boy to attract male clients, and she wants to make enough money to obtain a drug that allows for a sex change without surgery, which, by the way, the pronouns change. So it's she at this point. To that end, she starts working as a maid for Esther Escudero. Esther is a member of a cult that worships an anemone whose tentacles grant time-traveling powers. So Esther believes that Asilde is like the chosen one and agrees to pass on her abilities to her. Asilde transitions, and then we start using he pronouns, and gains time-traveling powers as the chosen one to go back and repair everything that's gone wrong. Okay, so from there we get two time threads outside of that one. One where Asilde travels back to the 2000s and becomes a man named Giorgio, who works as a music manager, amongst other things. He falls in love with a woman named Linda, who is desperate to save the oceans. Giorgio uses art to raise money for her lab so that she can do that. And then we have another timeline where he travels back to the 15th century during the time of Spanish colonization and is a pirate named Rook. In both timelines, he meets a man named Argenis, who also has time-traveling abilities after touching a tentacle while deep-sea diving. During an exhibition of art, and while art of Argenis that he created in the 15th century is appraised, Giorgio meets the future president, largely to blame for what happened to the oceans. He debates talking to him about it, which is what the mission was, like warning him about it. But in the end, he chooses not to, deciding instead to abandon his future self and live his life with Linda as a man. Yes, that's how it ends. So basically gives up the whole thing. And it's like, I'm happy here right now. So no need. Yep.
The abrupt ending, like it is so abrupt that I'm like, wait, what's going? That's the end. It just goes like, thanks for reading.
Yeah, the next page is like, thank you. Like, oh, whoa.
Then I thought maybe it was a part of it. I thought it was going to be a setup.
Yeah, I did too, because it was like, thanks, reader. Like, oh, okay.
Y'all, it wasn't a setup.
No.
Yeah.
No, it was not. So themes. One of the big ones, obviously, climate change. So we have a couple quotes in here about it, but it's like the whole thing is the ocean is turned into like brown sludge. There's no fish anymore. There's no creatures in there anymore. And it's just really created this dystopian environment where things have just gotten way worse. Here's a quote. How lost and obtuse the people of that small town looked now. How sad their small plans and projections. How comedic the desperation of someone who does not yet know a marvelous destiny awaits around the corner. So because Asilde Giorgio can see these times, he's always kind of like pontificating about like, oh, well, you don't know what's coming, but I've been in these three separate timelines, and that moment of like the middle part of Giorgio being like, oh, this is so nice right now, but knowing what is coming. Here's another quote. Where others saw scenery, Linda Goldman saw desolation. Where others heard relaxing subaquatic silence, she heard the shrieks of life disappearing. Where others saw a gift from God given for the enjoyment of humankind, she saw an ecosystem fallen victim to a systematic and criminal attack. When she looked at the coral reef, she felt like an oncologist standing before her patient's body. She knew she could save it, although she also understood the disproportionate capacity of evil and its reach down to its finest detail. In order to make the miracle happen, it was necessary to have a measure of extreme optimism and critical realism that would drive anybody crazy. So Linda's the one that's really trying to save the ocean, is really concerned about it, has a lot of mental health issues around it, and is just trying to get like anybody on board with it and to make money to build this lab. Here's another quote. She knew how many times these nets were tossed into the waters, and she lived each day working against that sinister clock. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff in there about like climate change education, not enforcing laws to protect the oceans or water, and her frustration about that. Here's another quote. In a few years, when those of us who saw it are no longer around, people will talk about the fish in the sea as though they were unicorns. It's pretty dire.
Right.
Not good at all.
Well, like the beginning with the anemone, the prophecy had worked out that Esther, who had owned this thing, was taking super good care of it. The main character, it was trying to plot to steal it and sell it because it was worth so much money because that there was no sea creatures left. I mean, that's how Esther also dies. So there's that because of that. But that level of like despair and trying to keep the oceans alive. And by the way, the beginning technology of it all was like, what's happening? I had to try to figure out what was happening with like, they just killed someone. Okay. They just poisoned someone on the step. Again, very, very like futuristic. But like the level of what they need and what they see. And then like going back in time to see like this one man protecting this one area with all the sea creatures because he knows something that's coming up. And it ends up being the main character coming back to himself. It's a lot, y'all. But yes, sea creatures, very important. I think that's obvious. And I think that's an obvious conversation that we've had repeatedly.
Yeah. Yes. What another theme is time travel. So here's a quote. According to the letter, Black Cubans called a certain marine creature Olokun. It could travel back in time, dude. Very Lovecraftian. So they have like this myth, or I won't even say myth, but they have this story of like this creature that can do that. And I thought it was really, again, like you said, Samantha, it's very creative in like the way that those powers are granted and how it worked. And the ending is pretty depressing, but it is sort of like getting lost in the idyllic past of like, well, I don't want to go back to that future where it sucks and everything when I'm so happy right here, right now. Because the future is really bad. And going back to that technology you mentioned, it is very Big Brother. It is very Big Brother-y. There's a lot of talk about like technology that tracks you everywhere. There is, and I'll talk about it more in a second, but like these like bulldozer things that just kill immigrants. Like there's a lot of the government technology is scary in this. Yes. And that brings us to class, which is another big theme because even in the apocalypse, things are exacerbated, but the rich are essentially fine. That's sort of what it's showcasing, like right out the gate is like, oh, I can just kill somebody I don't want around from my like little doorbell. Just immediately.
Just kidding. Sorry, you're cluttering up my front door.
I don't like it. Yeah. Oof. Again, it comes out hitting hard. It does not wait.
No, immediately. Like several things you're like, well, damn. Like, and then you mentioned rape immediately. You're like, what? And then they become friends. I'm like, what is happening?
Yes. Yep. Pretty quick. There's also a lot of issues of like racism and colorism within like this discussion of class. Like I said, there are these bulldozers that roam the streets and kill illegals, as they're called, on the spot. And the author has been a very big critic of anti-Haitian legislation in the Dominican Republic, and it was supposed to reflect that based on what interviews I read with her. Colonization is also a big theme. Here's a quote from the Los Angeles Review of Books. "It is an age of unbearable heat, and La Llorona, with its 2 years of rain. La Llorona, the weeping woman, is the name given to La Malinche, Herman Cortez's Nuaja interpreter and mistress, often reviled for her key role in facilitating the Spanish conquest. By calling this extreme weather event La Llorona, environmental crisis is associated with the demise of indigenous peoples after the arrival of the Spanish in the 15th century, as well as by implication with more recent neo-imperial activity in the region." That was a really interesting article. It had a lot of good points. Because again, when the first time you're reading it, I'm like, oh, yeah, there's so much going on here. I need somebody to... So it helped me out. Also, sexism, yes. There's a lot of sexism in it. There's a lot of misogyny in it, especially from the character who kind of embodies all of this, Anney. He's bad news. He's just bad news.
Yes.
He's got a lot of insecurity about his masculinity. He fantasizes about violence against women.
Mm-hmm.
He's very homophobic, which we'll get into in a second. He's constantly thinking about sex when Linda's just trying to run scientific tests on the ocean. It's like, that's
she loves her husband.
Yes, loves her husband. Here's a quote from him. "In his head, Giorgio was an altruistic man who believed in him, and she was a conceited and selfish slut."
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then, homophobia. Asilde's family arranges for a man to rape her as a child to get rid of her, quote, masculine tendencies. And yes, later when she is raped during sex work, her lack of reaction is really, really telling. The author has a bunch of quotes about that as well. There's a whole thing about like rejected men starting rumors that a woman is a lesbian because she rejected them. And Anney's, yes, being homophobic, but having homosexual desires. So internalized homophobia for him. Which, by the way, if you're wondering, he's the one who killed the dog. So
yes, and celebrating that.
Yeah, he was very bad news. Yeah, also themes of just being trans or queer. So in the book, there's this drug called Rainbow Bright. That's the injection that you can use that gives you like a sex change without surgery. That's what Asilde was trying to save up for and eventually got. But then I read a lot of stuff from the author too about like, you know, being in different bodies across time and the powers and privileges that comes with that in different bodies. So that was an interesting thing in terms of like time travel, seeing those different windows. And yeah, mental health is a big theme in there. And then lastly, I would say art. Going back, the author is a musician, like an author, very into art. Art is a huge theme, especially in kind of the 2000s timeline, where they sort of have like a compound, it feels like almost, where they got people making art.
Yeah. I was like, they're good friends. No, they're a compound. No, you got kicked out. Well, yes, he killed the dog, so all those things. But what's happening? Also, they only use them to make art. But at the same time, what?
Yeah, so they sort of all came together to make art to make money so Linda could, you know, finance her lab so that you could save the water.
And then like the random DJ. She decided she was a DJ, and I was like, okay, go ahead, Elizabeth, be a DJ.
Yeah, yes.
Apparently you're doing it.
Yes. Yeah. All kinds of art, painting, music, and stuff. Here's a quote. "When he stood by her side, she felt infused by his presence and discovered specifically and eloquently the extreme poverty suffered by Haitian workers, the tragic ties with which this ancient ceremony held on to the present, the permanency of a kind of slavery that now dressed itself up as paid labor, and the power of a music that lodged deities in human bodies, deities powerful enough to swallow the world." So this was an interesting thing that I was reading about after I finished the book was, you know, they're sort of, using art to save the world, but it's still very self-serving. Like, it's still very like, I want to be a DJ now. And she did put a lot of work into it. Like, she was thinking about like Jacques Cousteau, like she was putting all these things in there. But you know, in the end, it's still very, she wanted to do it. And one day it was like, you know what?
Right.
I want to try this. Gonna try this. And then once you get to the end, it felt very much like, okay, you're kind of looking the other way, but you're making yourself feel better. Like, you're kind of like, see, I'm doing my part, but you're just sort of just starting to do something to make yourself feel like the world isn't ending.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting, too, because there was a lot of stuff in there about, you know, tourism in Dominican Republic and how beautiful it was in this world. So it's got all these lovely descriptions. It's very idyllic at this point. But knowing what's coming, it's sort of like, you need to not look away. You need to not look away. Yeah. Yeah. It packed in a lot real quick.
Yes.
And I'm going to be thinking about it for a minute. I could tell.
Sure. Like the ending was just like, wait, what? I mean, it's kind of like, I will say, unlike other time travel movies or time travel books, it does talk about the consequences of what happens later. So the whole reason, once again, the rationale was, if I talk to Saeed about the fact that this is going to happen, not only will I not get out of sex work, as the original character who transitioned, who was like, finally, I found my way to be happy, and that's by ending my life here and being my past self. But if he was not able to get to that point, which he could get to that point through these disasters, you know, like that was the whole point. It's like he's going to undo everything and he won't exist, or he'll be so unhappy. Like and he won't be able to fix that for himself. So he chose himself, as you had already said, over the environment, the whole world. But again, it does take into account where everybody else just like impulsively does things. He thought about it. He's like, well, this is what's going to happen to me. So no, thank you.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely a whole like inner conversation that happened where he was like, well, if I do this, complications and what is going to happen there. And he was very much trying to convince himself, I think. But there were valid points where like, we could build this lab. Like maybe it could, you know, again, I think
this will save it.
I think the main point was convincing yourself and like turning away.
Right.
But there were, there was a conversation had internally.
And then watching himself die. Like that was it. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a thing, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I do love time travel, so it was fun for me.
So there's new ways to do it, and they found a new way.
They did, yes. Well, listeners, as always, let us know if you have any suggestions for this, if you have any thoughts about this book. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I'll Never Told You. We have a T-Bell bookstore, and we have a book. You can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Myra, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.